Is that a thing? Like, what is breath work?
Right.
Maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So breathwork is kind of a loaded word, and it's evolving because originally breathwork was a word that was describing using breathing to accomplish an alternate state of reality. So a non-ordinary state. So in the early days of breathwork, and I discussed this in my first book, a practical guide to breathwork. I give what I call just a brief history of breathwork in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And in the West, there was the original breathworks, and they were all sort of they were literally, the goal was to have a non-ordinary state. So you had Leonard Orr's rebirthing, you had holotropic breathwork, you had liberation breathwork, you had vivation, you had a lot of these early ones, and they were all doing, while they were different in some of their ways. Mainly, it was, we're going to breathe deeply, and we're going to do a hyperventilation for long periods of time.
Mm.
And so when a person said breath work, a lot of people would think that. Now, over the years, there's been a lot of developments in how we understand how breathing interacts and interfaces within us, right? And so you might say it's how we communicate with our nervous system. In my last book on breathwork, Language of Breath, I expand that even further, because I believe it's even more than just the autonomic nervous system. It's our whole being. It's the unconscious. There's this conscious you and the unconscious you that's interfacing. But now, when we think of breath work, we're thinking about not only, okay, there is a way to reach a non-ordinary state, but there's also every single breath you take, and that will influence how you feel. Not only that, is the way you feel influences how you breathe. And when we start to become more aware of this interface, we can start to take an active role in improving how this inner relationship works. And when I say inner relationship, I know that sounds a little weird, almost sounds a little woo-woo, but ultimately what I'm talking about is everything that's within the human organism. And there's an unconscious you, if you will, so the unconscious processes that ultimately is where your emotions come from, your self beliefs, your sense of humor. I mean, this is the part of you that you train. So when we work with athletes, they practice, and then they say, I keep getting into my head so much, right? And so what we're trying to do is help them. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the unconscious becomes uncertain, and so it kicks things up to the conscious you, which is not as fast. It's able to do meticulous thinking, but not fast thinking. Your unconscious, that's the part when they always talked about, I remember in school, they would talk about how your brain is the supercomputer. And I was like, dude, I can't even find my keys. I am just, ultimately it's that unconscious you. That's where the training is. So when we use breath, there's a wide variety of how we can use breath. We're thinking about, okay, functional breathing. So literally how your physiology does the act of breathing, how it invites air in and it lets air out, how those things interface with your nervous system.
So that's functional breathing. That's a definition of functional breathing.
Right. So when we talk about breath work now, it's not just alternate state. There is that, but then there's the functional aspects. So these are realigning our breathing patterns with our natural breathing patterns. There's very few exceptions, but most of us, the vast majority of us, are born perfect breathers. If you observe a baby breathing, they walk around and they're not worried about having abs and their tummy's out. It's like a little sumo wrestler, and they're doing functional breathing, and that's how we're born. And then just over time, just like so many things, we develop dysfunctional breathing patterns. And this is something that when we focus on this aspect of breath work, we're saying, okay, we want to restore the functional breathing pattern, which is going to give you the best gas exchange. So there's literally, we're trying to facilitate the best gas exchange, but we're also wanting, because that better gas exchange, we can slow down our breathing, which is going to send a more relaxed signal to the nervous system. So, and that unconscious is like, well, I guess maybe we're not in such danger after all. What we'll often find is that because of dysfunctional breathing patterns, We'll see a person over breathing throughout the day, and
Mm.
they have a dysfunctional. Basically, they're breathing in the wrong areas. So they're using maybe the wrong pattern of breathing, the wrong muscle groups. And because of this, they have to breathe faster to facilitate what you would normally be able to accomplish if you had functional breathing. And what that does is it sends that message to the unconscious that, hey, we're not safe. And so when that happens, there's a lot of things that happen. So, for instance, you'll have more stress hormones. You'll feel more stress. Stress will affect you more powerfully. So, the stresses of daily life, they will affect you in a more powerful way. And we'll also see, for instance, with athletes and people who are really stressing their physiology with a metabolic load, we'll see they just can't keep up. And oftentimes with athletes, it's an amazing athlete. So for instance, right now, I've taken on a lot of athletes over my years. Right now, I have two very good athletes. They compete in the world championships in jiu-jitsu. They've placed multiple times in the top 3, and and whenever I started working with them, they had very dysfunctional breathing. They had all sorts of issues with their breathing. And so it's interesting because, and I would say that is a testament to the executive function or the grit, if you will, of athletes, that they can make it happen even though their patterns are working against them. So you'll often see an athlete, not just with dysfunctional breathing patterns, but you'll see them with dysfunctional movement patterns and things like that. And somehow they're still dominating, right? And so what I do with athletes is, and what my students do, the other language of breath coaches, they'll say, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to examine how you are right now. And the good news is you're already a great athlete. We are going to unlock something you never knew you had locked up. And so the functional aspect, oh my God, and then suddenly they're like, wow, I have more endurance. I can go harder for longer. I am able to sleep better, recover better, heal better. I'm not having such a long time from my overall recovery. And that adds up over time. And you start to see athletes that get this kind of training dominate. And so when it comes to breath work, we have the kind of the older style, which is still present. And I still offer language of breath. We have some what we call integrative breath works, which takes a person into a non-ordinary state. But then we have the functional breath work. So functional breath work is literally just trying to make sure the physiology works as it's supposed to facilitate the best gas exchange and nervous system regulation. And then we also, in addition to that, we have specific techniques and methodologies just for nervous system regulation. And that is, so there's 3 main, what you might consider nowadays, when we say breath work, it could be any of those 3 things. And you can do all of them. Like in the language of breath, we do all of them.
Hello there, and thank you so much for stopping by this channel. I hope you find this content useful, and if you do, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It will really help me to reach to more people and keep this content going. Here we are journeying together, and let's see where this takes us.